I want to talk now about the impact of stress and the unprocessed emotions, like the more distressing emotions that arise in response to situations or events or interactions that we find to be difficult or upsetting or that trigger us emotionally. And the challenge for so many people arises from the fact that we've never learned to work constructively with our authentic emotional responses. And so, for that reason, whatever we don't process or digest accumulates within our bodies. And as I work with people individually, I feel this accumulation of all this like stagnant, unprocessed emotion and the stress. It's like the residual of the stress and these emotions. It accumulates within the body. I'm Ben Ufana, and be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. But anyway, let's dive into it. I will refer to my notes because I have a rather detailed article that I've put together, and I'll post the link to the article below. And I encourage you to click on the link, read the article itself, which will have a lot more depth that I'm not going to remember to say everything in this article. So forgive me if I glance at the article too. But anyway, so, as I said, the vast majority of people are us. We haven't learned to work constructively with our emotions. Why? Because it wasn't modeled for us. We grew up in families and cultures that were not emotionally literate, lacked emotional intelligence. It just wasn't taught. It just wasn't a part of our cultures, our families. And for that reason, when we encounter difficult or stressful, upsetting situations and circumstances or have difficult interactions and it triggers us emotionally, a lot of times we don't want to go there. We don't want to feel that. We're just doing the best we can to cope and get through life. And so we tend to disconnect, we numb out, we distract ourselves, we just do all kinds of things so as not to feel. And we self medicate with alcohol and other recreational drugs, all kinds of things, but we don't feel. But have you ever walked into a room, for instance, and somebody was angry or upset without them saying a word? You feel it. You feel the intensity of those emotions. Why? Because emotions have a substance to them. You can't see them like you can physical objects. You can't reach out and touch it, so to speak, but they do have a substance. And that accounts for a lot of this like heaviness or stagnation that accumulates within the body. Because when we go through these events in our lives and it elicits these powerful emotional responses or even just the stress of work, that when we don't process these stresses and emotions, they accumulate in our bodies, and over time, they become thicker, heavier, more congealed. When we first experience these emotions and they're more in the acute stage, they tend to expand around our bodies, and you could feel the anger, the fear, the upset. But when we don't express it or process these emotions, they become more compacted in a sense. A lot of this emotion remains trapped within the organs, the tissues, the cells of the body. And as I said, as I'm working with people, I see this on a daily basis. It also forms chronic tension, like our neck, our shoulders, uh, especially the upper back, and sometimes it could be middle, lower back. But we have specific areas where we accumulate this stress and there's this chronic tension that builds up. We're all impacted by difficult, infuriating, at times anxiety provoking, stressful events of our lives. And to a large extent, many of us fail to register the impact of these stresses despite their adverse effects. So, I want to call your attention to some of them and to identify some of these stressors. We need to first be able to acknowledge, to identify them, to make them real, or to you have to be able to acknowledge or know what it is in order to at least start out to be able to register it cognitively. I don't know what you call it, where they talk about you could put a frog in a pot of water and you can gradually turn the temperature up, and you keep turning that temperature up gradually, and the frog will stay in the pot of water until it boils to death. If you dropped it into hot water, the frog would immediately jump out. But if you gradually increase that temperature, the frog will not notice, and the temperature, as it continues to increase and it gets too hot, and eventually the frog will boil to death. And I feel something comparable is happening to many of us. So let's start out by talking about work related stress. And that's going to depend to some extent on your profession and your place of employment. There have been significant improvements in some areas, but that depends. There has been a trend over the past few decades of employers seeking to get as much as they possibly can out of their employers. For instance, I've worked with a number of people who are employed for whether it's Chase or other banks or those working in the financial industry. A number of these individuals are sometimes working as many as 60 hours in a week. A lot of pressures, demands, expectations placed upon them. And there are instances that I've heard of numerous occasions, employees either being fired or quitting or resigning or just retiring or having to stop working, partly because of a health crisis. And so the remaining employees, in addition to doing their existing job, ending up having to take on the responsibilities of those employees who leave. Many of us are in survival mode, and it doesn't help the fact that you have the increasing rents, the increasing cost of purchasing and owning a home. In New York City, for instance, rents can easily go up by hundreds, or even as the lease turns over, the rent can jump over $1,000. A lot of it's because of the greed of landlords in this market with so many people packing into the city. Many landlords are like, well, how much can I get away with? How much can I charge? Prices rising on foods, even though many corporations are showing record profits. There's this thing called greedflation. There's discussions about, like, well, how much can we charge here? So despite the record profits, they're jacking prices up. And then there's also shrinkflation, where like you're buying tortilla chips, for instance, and they're selling smaller packages instead of 16-ounce bags like we were used to for years. Now it's a 12-ounce bag, or maybe a 10 or 8-ounce bag for the same or even more money sometimes. And so that can evoke a whole range of emotions as we're struggling, some of us, to put food on the table. Many of us these days, we're just not getting enough sleep for all kinds of reasons. We're working long hours, lengthy commute, added work responsibilities, for instance, work related emails that we're expected to read and respond to after work, being on call. In addition, many of us are spending all this additional time scrolling on our phones when we should be resting, often late into the nights. And that makes it more challenging as well, the stress and the fact that we're scrolling for us to get to sleep. And so many of us are chronically sleep deprived. When we're not getting enough rest, that impedes our ability to process our emotions and our lived experiences. I remember vividly growing up, I'm dating myself here, but going back into the 70s and even 80s, there was a lot more space around. I think what it was, 1980, it was something about 4.5 billion people on the planet. And currently it's 8.1 billion. So within this short period of time, relatively short, considering how long we've been on the planet, our population has nearly doubled. And places that I've spent a lot of time or have lived, where there used to be neighborhoods, open fields, forest, and now it's like uh, high rises and strip malls and shopping centers and supermarkets. So there's more and more crowding. It doesn't feel like there's even room to breathe. And in cities like Colombo, Sri Lanka, Mumbai in India, other major Indian cities, before people relied on this network of commuter trains and buses. But as people are now acquiring automobiles, just to go the distance of 20 kilometers, it can take you easily 2.5, maybe more hours just to get across town. And that eats up a lot of your day, just trying to commute, and it's stressful as hell. Then there's all the distractive technologies, and it's getting worse in many ways. It's contributing to our sensory overload, and with the shorts and reels and TikToks, and it's rewiring our brains, so it makes it extremely difficult for us to pay attention for any significant length of time. These distractive technologies are designed to trigger our brain's dopamine reward system. So it prompts us to continually be seeking out the next reward and the next reward and next reward. And so, with all this overwhelming amount of stimulus flooding through our sensory channels, it overwhelms our brain mind's processing capacity. As a result, that impedes our ability to process, to digest our lived experiences and our subsequent emotional responses. Years ago, I remember flying midweek. Middle seats were often empty, and so you had more room to stretch out and breathe. There was more space between rows. But over the years, they made a science out of it. How many people can they possibly pack into these airplanes? Seats have been reduced in size, the rows are closer together. We're all empathic to some degree. So when you're sandwiched into that tiny little space with all those people, and you cannot help but be affected by all the stagnant emotion and stress that they hold in their bodies, the recreational drugs, alcohol, and other whatever they're taking to self-medicate, or the pharmaceuticals that they're on, whether it's antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, or meds for all their physical health issues, and their garbage diets. And so when you're packed in with all those people, you just, to some extent, you absorb the garbage that they carry. So space is crucial. There are other factors affecting us too, like the extreme polarization. Back in the 80s, President Ronald Reagan eliminated the fairness doctrine, whereas before there would be more of a discussion of relevant issues, the different positions, advantages and disadvantages. With the elimination of the fairness doctrine, you had conflict entrepreneurs show up on the scene like Rush Limbaugh and all this incendiary rhetoric to polarize people, and it just inflamed passions and tensions. And then to make it even worse, you have all the conspiracies and conspiracists like QAnon and like Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson. And it's frustrating because there are many of us that can no longer hold a rational or even sane conversation with some of our friends from way back, our neighbors, our coworkers, our family members. Then there's the economic disparity. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, they're talking about the top 10% of households now control approximately 70% of the nation's wealth, whereas the middle 50% hold only 27% of the nation's wealth, and the bottom 40% hold a mere 3% of the nation's total wealth. And so, as the wealth continues to concentrate among the top earners, the middle and lower income families face increasing financial pressures, and that exacerbates stress and anxiety. The economic strain limits our ability to access quality healthcare, education, housing. It contributes to a cycle of hardship, and it affects our mental, physical, and emotional health. Now, as bad as things can get here for us in the United States, I still feel that it pales in comparison to the suffering experienced by peoples in other parts of the world. In many ways, we have been largely insulated from the wars that have occurred in the past few decades, maybe with the exception of those who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. But many people take this attitude that, well, these wars are in a far off land and they don't really affect us. Because of that, we tend to be less understanding and less empathetic of the suffering of people in these other parts of the world. I spent a great deal of time in Sri Lanka during its brutal war with the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or LTTE, or otherwise known as the Tamil Tigers. I have friends on both sides of the conflicts. Actually, people who were both rebel combatants and also other people who were in the Sri Lankan army. And it's really sad. I think a couple 100,000 people died in this tiny island nation. There were disappearances and torture and mass graves, just all kinds of stuff. And I got politically involved towards the very end with a number of other people. We were working desperately to try to gain the attention of the United Nations, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and other nations, just to try to put pressure on the Sri Lankan government and military to stop the killing. There are estimates like tens of thousands of innocent civilians were killed by the Sri Lankan government and military, and they were executing rebel combatants. It was a horrific situation. Currently, we're into the third year of Russia's barbaric war of aggression against Ukraine. Something like about 19,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted and taken to Russia. Russia is raining guided bombs and missiles into densely populated urban centers, severely wounding, killing thousands of people. It's also disrupting the GPS satellite navigational systems over the Baltic seas. I think some additional areas as well. Planes have actually had to just turn around and go back because there's a danger that these planes could crash. Russia already sees itself at war with the West. And Putin, in many respects, is like Hitler. If he is able to overrun Ukraine, it will not stop. The conflict will very likely spill into the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. It will spill into Poland and beyond. If you see the Russian propaganda channels, which occasionally I watch, and the rhetoric, it's very frightening. Trauma has a lasting impact on the body, and a large percentage of us as children, as teens, we were subjected to physical, emotional, childhood sexual, or adolescent abuse as well. Many of us were bullied in school. There are those among us who have served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, carry the scars of wartime trauma. There are refugees from other countries who have experienced the horrors of the wars in their nation of birth. A large percentage of women have endured sexual harassment, those who were sexually assaulted. So many of us carry the scars of this traumatic wounding. And because of the fact that we haven't learned to work with our emotions, we carry these scars, and it further compounds the stresses that many of us are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And the fact that life in our modern day world is accelerating with all its increasing demands, and as the technology advances, it's like life is demanding more of us. We're expected to keep up. And this relentless demand to stay connected and to be productive. And it just adds to the stress that many of us are experiencing. And there's diminishes our capacity to relax and enjoy life. In addition, many of us are dealing with other conflicts or issues that arise with friends, our family of origin, our romantic partners. But all these stresses and emotions that arise, we need to be able to digest both our lived experiences. We need to be able to digest and assimilate the stresses and our subsequent cognitive and emotional responses. So, how is all this stress impacting us? The stress activates our body's sympathetic nervous system, leading to the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones prepare the body's fight or flight response. And while that could be beneficial in some instances for short periods of time, chronic activation of this stress response can lead to health problems such as heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes and other illnesses. And it exacerbates and maintains the physical tension that many of us hold in our neck and back and shoulders and other parts of our bodies that can lead to chronic pain and discomfort. On a psychological level, the continuous stress and the unaddressed emotions exacerbates mental health issues. It further contributes to our depression and anxiety, insomnia, and the unresolved emotions. It takes a toll, diminishing our cognitive functions. It impairs our decision making abilities and reduces our ability to focus and manage tasks effectively. It also places an enormous strain on our relationships. Hinders our ability to form relationships, often contributing to social isolation, which can exacerbate our stress and emotional distress. It can make us more irritable and withdrawn and overly dependent on others. And it's compounded by factors such as job insecurity and financial difficulties and other social pressures. The tension that we hold within our bodies reflects how we've disconnected from parts of ourselves. And as I've said before, a healthy and loving relationship starts with ourself or starts with you. But anyway, we must develop a more intimate relationship with ourselves before we can experience a healthier and more intimate relationship with anyone else, with other people. The traumas of my own childhood and adolescence as they were carrying over into my adult life. And I found myself forming attachments to women that were unavailable or disinterested, abusive in some instances. And so intuitively, I began to develop a series of intensive meditation practices. I also explored other practices and therapeutic interventions. And as the deep emotional wounds healed, I was able to develop a more intimate relationship with myself. And as that happened, I saw that reflected back to me. I was able to let go of the unhealthier or more toxic attachments. And in their place, I was able to attract individuals into my life with whom I was able to form healthier, more meaningful, and more deeply fulfilling relationships. We invariably internalize the stresses of daily life along with our own emotional responses to situations that are hurtful, upsetting, anxiety provoking, disappointing, that evoke feelings of anger. And yet, a significant portion of our population remains largely unaware of the profound impact of these stresses upon their own bodies and minds. The lack of awareness can prevent us from recognizing the signs of the accumulation of the stress until they manifest as either physical or psychological health issues. The stresses and unprocessed emotions that we internalize, they do not merely linger within us, they also bind parts of our bodies and minds. This binding not only restricts our physical and emotional flexibility, but it also consumes many of our vital resources. All these energies are diverted to managing unresolved emotional turmoil, and our overall vitality and capacity for healing and growth are significantly diminished. Understanding and acknowledging the sources and symptoms of our stresses and emotional distress are crucial steps for managing the effects more effectively. And by becoming more cognizant of how stress influences our daily lives, we can better mitigate its impacts and develop more effective solutions to the challenges that we face. As I said before, our lived experiences and our subsequent emotional responses need to be thoroughly digested. I began to develop a series of intensive meditation practices in my mid 20s, which have proven to be the most effective of any practices I know of for the purpose of facilitating this digestive process. And I teach these practices to everyone I work with. And it's important in working with these practices, you want to start by acknowledging what's happening in your life. Bring any issues or challenges, uh, situation confronting you, bring that directly into the forefront of your awareness. Notice any feelings or bodily sensations that arise in response, either to that person, situation, circumstance, or issue. What are you feeling? What is it? Is it sadness, anger, frustration, disappointment? There's a range, as I said before, of pleasant, enjoyable feelings, but we're going to deal in this case more with the unpleasant because that's where we get locked up. That's where we get stuck. Anyway, notice where these feelings are situated in your body. Bring as much awareness as you can to these areas within your body. Feel what you honestly feel. Fully immerse your awareness in the depths of these feelings and sensations wherever they're situated, and begin to breathe very softly, very deeply. And a lot of people struggle processing their emotions because the fact that they tend to breathe so shallowly. They breathe high up in their chest. So it's crucial here. Make sure you're breathing all the way down to your abdomen and be expanding your rib cage, breathing as deeply as you possibly can without forcing it. And also to breathe as slowly and softly as you possibly can. So the breath is so subtle that if the room were completely silent, you could barely, if at all, you might not be able to hear at all, your breathing. Because you do so, it initiates a much deeper processing capacity within your body and mind. It engages the innate healing intelligence residing within your body and mind. And this innate healing intelligence enables you to process or digest these lived experiences and your subsequent cognitive and emotional responses. It also will present to you creative, workable solutions. Now, again, as you work with this practice, I'm encouraging you to be fully immersed in the depths of the feelings and the bodily sensations. You're not looking at them from a distance. You're being subjective. You want to fully immerse in everything you feel. So as you work with this practice, feelings and bodily sensations often expand to occupy more of your body. Other times you may feel or experience the feelings and sensations moving or traveling into other parts of your body. Feelings and sensations sometimes go through this progression where maybe you start out, you're experiencing anger, but that anger will transition to sadness. The sadness may transition to feelings of acceptance. Working with this practice not only facilitates a natural process of digestion, but it also enables you to come to a deeper understanding, making it easier for you to resolve any underlying emotional conflicts. And this understanding is going to enable you to adapt to your immediate circumstances and to navigate this ever changing world more effectively. During the early stages of the COVID pandemic, I suddenly found myself with, like so many other people, with all this additional time. I didn't quite know what to do with myself. And so I ended up out in northern Idaho, spending a lot of time to myself, and I just decided I needed to be doing something productive, so I determined that I was gonna do at least 3 hours of intensive daily sitting meditation, and it was amazing that I found that by committing to sitting in this intensive deep meditation practice, that I was found myself working through layer upon layer of stress and all this emotional residual that I'd held in my body. There's something about sitting for these extended periods of time that enabled me to descend to much, much deeper levels than I had been able to before. Much of the discussion that I hear of meditation talks about, and I think it has a lot to do with the attention deficit of so many people living here in our modern day world with all the technology and social media and our devices. As I said before, it's rewiring our brains. So it's just makes it extraordinarily difficult for us to tolerate stillness or silence. We always got to be feeding off of some kind of stimulus, whether through our devices or binging on Netflix or whatever it is, are doing something. It makes us hyperactive as hell. But the problem with these like short little 15, 20-minute segments of meditation or even worse, guided meditations is that, well, although it may be helpful to some degree, it's just barely taking the edge off. I'll get some pushback from people at times, and they'll say, well, who has time for that now? And yet I challenge people when they say so. It's like, well, how much time are you spending scrolling on your smartphone through social media? How much time do you spend binging on Netflix? So a lot of it depends on what you choose to do with your time. Seriously, do you want to just spend your life vegetating and using distractive technologies that is in a very harmful way changing the biochemical balance of your brain and your brain's neural structure? Or do you want to utilize these practices that have been proven over thousands of years to develop your body and mind, to facilitate your healing and growth? What is it you want to do? What's going to provide you with the greatest benefit? So 15 or 20 minutes is great if you're starting out, but I encourage you, if at all possible, work up 30 minutes. If you can do an hour, that's much better. I understand if you're a single parent or even a couple with young children and you're working, sometimes it leaves very little downtime. But and if that case, I would just say find any moments of silence or stillness that you can to process, to decompress. But if at all possible, extend your practice. Again, work up to an hour, 90 minutes, even 2 or more hours. Most days, I usually do at least a good 2 hours of intensive meditation practice. I also take time and do martial arts training too. And in all the ancient traditional cultures, and the ancient spiritual lineages, the Hindu Vedic traditions, Taoist lineages like you find in China, among the Native Americans, the Sufis, which are the mystical sect of Islam, in all these ancient traditions, it was typical for those who attain mastery, who possess extraordinary gifts and capabilities. It was commonplace. They just practice, they do hours of intensive daily practice. Now, much of the stress, the frustration, anger, sadness, grief, fear, all these emotions will accumulate as a form of muscular body armor. It's this chronic tension. Much of it will show up in your neck, shoulders, upper back, or even other parts of your back. Sometimes it's down your abdomen. It can be in your chest cavity. In your chest cavity, many people, it restricts their ability to breathe. When it's down in the abdomen, it could impede your ability to digest your food and to eliminate waste. So, one of the practices that I've done and that I walk other people through is that I have them bring their awareness into these areas of chronic tension, such as their neck and shoulders and upper back. And I've done this. Sometimes I'll focus for 30 minutes to an hour or more at a time, just specifically in these areas. And I'll return. This is not a quick fix. I'll return to these areas and continue to focus at times for days, weeks, or even months. And as you continue to bring your awareness back to these areas of chronic tension, that tension will begin to break down and dissolve, and it will free up these areas of chronic muscular body armor. Again, it could also show up in your lungs or your abdomen. So, wherever you feel chronic tension, bring your awareness to these parts of your body. Another practice that I'll have people do that I refer to as the instinctual mind. Through experimentation years ago, I was at one point bringing my awareness into my chest cavity, focusing on the the feelings, the sensations of deadening that I felt in my chest cavity after a former girlfriend when she became involved with another partner, and he said, "If you have to be friends with your ex, I will leave you." And so losing that connection to someone I really valued, I just felt a lot of deadness. So late at night, driving from Santa Fe back to Albuquerque, I was breathing into that deadening that I felt in the middle of my chest. As I kept doing that, there were gradually faint vapors of feeling, then feelings of loneliness and longing, and my entire chest cavity was aching. But then after some time, I began to breathe deep into my abdomen. I was wondering, well, what would happen if I brought my awareness down into my intestines? And so, as I kept breathing with my focus in the abdomen at first, like so many other people, I didn't feel much. There tends to be a lot of numbing or disconnect from this part of our body. And yet, for many people, it's the largest repository of all this unprocessed or undigested stress and all these like emotions that we're not allowing ourselves to feel, these emotions that we're not able to process. They get backed up in our bodies. And again, the abdomen for most of us becomes the largest repository. But what I found is that by bringing my awareness down to my abdomen, it's like a lot of these core themes or issues that I've been struggling with my life, it's somehow by going down to the abdomen, it felt like it was going to a much deeper level as far as it was helping me to deconstruct a lot of these holding patterns that I was stuck in, various issues or dynamics that were playing out in my life. So it felt like it was going deeper into the underlying core of the issues. And then I could feel these patterns beginning to disintegrate and dissolve. Now, sometimes when you focus in the abdomen, what will happen is some of the stress and the emotions that you hold in the abdomen, like it will, as it breaks loose, it will run or travel to other parts of your body. There are times I could feel it moving up to my neck and shoulders or to my middle back. And so I just went with how I felt at the time. Sometimes I would continue to breathe just focused in the abdomen. Other times I would go ahead and shift my focus and go where that tension had moved, either my middle or upper back. Surprisingly, though, there are times when I've worked with people with TMJ and where they were holding that tension in their jaws and they were grinding their teeth, especially at night when they slept. And as I would have people focus their awareness in the abdomen, it had the effect of releasing a lot of the tension that they were holding in their jaw so that they were no longer grinding their teeth. As I have long said, I encourage you to the best of your ability, make use of the most effective practices and therapeutic interventions. Practices like it could be like qigong practices, That's another form of meditation. For those who don't know, are the types of meditation practices I teach. I guess pranayama is another kind of intensive meditation that you could incorporate. And there's also interventions. Interventions could be like deep tissue body work or chiropractic or sensory deprivation flotation tanks. Deep tissue body work is one of the most widely available, accessible interventions. In most parts of the country, there are individuals who either do therapeutic massage or rolfing or other systems of intensive deep body work. And I would encourage you to do that regularly, like at least once a month, better even once a week, because a lot of the stress and emotion that we're not able to process, it stores throughout the musculature and the tissues of the body. And so as you get consistent body work, it breaks a lot of this emotion and stress stored in the body. It breaks it loose so that it comes floating to the surface. That could be a bit uncomfortable for some of us when we have these emotions that come up. But for me, it's a real opportunity because once you bring these emotions to the surface, I find then as the emotions surface, I can breathe into them. And so as I access the emotions, breathe into them, I could then process them. And so it's freeing. Instead of having to carry it in my body as I process it, then I have more freedom, flexibility, range of motion. Oh, and as I mentioned a while ago, sensory deprivation flotation tanks. That's something I hadn't experienced until, I don't know, maybe a year prior to my making this recording. But in any case, I was missing out, and you are too if you don't have the chance to experience them. But uh, most people on their own, and a lot of it's because of the way we've been conditioned, are not able to reach intensive, deep states of meditation. And so there's something about when you're suspended in this bath of salt water and in total darkness, there's a way in which a lot of the stresses and memories and emotions, all that stuff just comes floating up to the surface. And so I've really enjoyed that. I keep myself open to any practice and any intervention that I find that is going to help me further my progress. I encourage you to do the same. Now, going way back in time, when I was 20, I began to apprentice with Horace Delkai. He was one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa Indian tribe. I had landed in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians when I took off on my own at the age of 17. I was going into peyote meetings, sitting up all night with the native elders. And it was in these meetings that I met my mentor, Horace. So during the apprenticeship, Horace would transmit portions of his own healing gifts, what they refer to as medicine. These gifts are healing powers. But in order to earn the right to work with these gifts, one goes through the vision quest, which is typically 4 days and nights, alone in the mountains, no food, no water. Now, during the vision quest, and especially on the fourth night, there are periods where I feel these extraordinarily powerful forces or beings descending into my body. At times, it has been like a near death experience where I would have portions of my life flashing before my eyes. I would be reliving events from my distant past, many of which I either had a vague recollection of or maybe no conscious memory at all. I'd be reliving these experiences, all of the vivid sensory impressions, the thought processes that were occurring at the time, and the emotions that I had long ago experienced, all the sensations, everything is just all flooding back. But it's amazing experiences because I could feel this extraordinarily powerful forces or beings working within me, enabling me to, it's like they were transmuting all these impressions and highly charged emotions, all this residual I was carrying, enabling me to digest and assimilate all that. And simultaneously building this new foundation. So it was deconstructing the old configurations based on past traumas or other limiting experiences and building these whole new configurations, building this whole new foundation. So as that happened, I felt this tremendous sense of being lighter and being freer, and that I had more resources, that I was more capable. And so my range of motion has expanded. Now, the vision quest is by far too intense for most people. Some of you could possibly work up to it, but it's going to take some, for most of you, it would really take some training. However, many people that I've worked with over the years describe, and I can see it happening myself as I work with these individuals. They're experiencing the same kind of results or transformation occurring as a result of the individual healing sessions that I facilitate. The fact that my mentor transmitted these gifts of healing to me, as well as going through the vision quest, because as I continue to go, it's receiving more of those healing gifts or that medicine. This extraordinarily powerful presence works through me, so that when you're carrying, as I see so many people, just about everybody, um, what I find is vast majority of people are carrying this backlog of stress, carrying all this residual of all these unprocessed emotions, going back to childhood wounding in many instances, and the stresses of school and stresses of jobs that, you know, a job that they don't want to be or that they find overwhelming, that they don't enjoy, and the hassles and the frustrations, stresses from present day family dynamics and their attempts at intimate relationships of having gone through breakup and divorce and death of a loved one, other significant losses. Vast majority of people are carrying a great deal of stress and emotional residual within their body that's unprocessed. All that heaviness and stagnation and all that muscular body armor that forms as well. And the stress, as I said, it saturates the organs, the tissues, even the cells of the body. So as I'm working with you individually, what happens is that presence working through me takes these lived experiences, all this highly charged emotion, all this stagnant emotional residual and stress. And it's like it's taking it, it's purifying it. Sometimes we absorb the emotions, the anger, or whatever emotion of people who were at times verbally, physically, even if we were subjected to childhood sexual abuse, we absorb these emotions and or whatever that the individuals who perpetrated against us were feeling or carrying at that time. So it's like it's taking all this toxicity, whatever we absorb from the environment and other people, and it's sifting that out. We don't need that. It's not ours. But our own emotional responses, that is taken, it's transformed, it's purified so that we're able to digest and assimilate that. We come out the other side lighter and freer. And it's building, well, first, it's not only reconfiguring, like where we carry a lot of this trauma, it's creating changes within the neurostructure of the brain, within the biochemical makeup, so that we're calmer and we're more balanced. And again, it's processing this backlog of highly charged emotions. And so, as that's happening, again, there's more of a sense of calm, more ease, a growing sense of well being. We feel lighter. And it's building this new foundation so that we gain access to greater resources. We begin to develop new capabilities. And as we develop a healthier, more intimate relationship with ourselves, we're able to attract into our lives companions with whom we could co create healthier, more meaningful, and more deeply fulfilling relationships. So much I've covered here, but again, I'd encourage you to read the article itself, but uh, read whatever it is that I forgot to mention or that I left out here. And again, do click like, do subscribe, And also visit my website, benufano.com, for many more articles. Thank you for joining me, and bye for now.